My stepmom humiliated me at my brother's wedding in front of 300 guests. But when I decided to abandon the $200K catering mid-reception, the wedding collapsed, and my business made $2.3 million that year for having a backbone. I'm 31 years old. I own a pretty successful catering company in Chicago. And after what happened a few months ago at my younger brother's wedding, I basically became the official villain of my family, though honestly I don't regret any of it. Well, maybe a little, but not for the reasons they think. I guess I should start from the beginning so this makes sense, because my family has been a mess for years and the wedding thing was just the straw that broke the camel's back. When I was 14, my mom died of cancer. It was fast, like 6 months from diagnosis to the end, and honestly that part of my life is kind of blurry because I think my brain decided to block most of the memories. What I do remember perfectly is that my dad met Helen like 10 months after the funeral. 10 months. Not even a year had passed, and he was already dating this woman who worked in his office, and 6 months after that, they got married. I was 15, Matthew was 12, and basically they told us we now had a new mom and that we should be grateful someone wanted to take care of us. Those were literally my dad's words. Take care of us. Like we were a problem that needed solving. Helen from the start made it clear that Matthew was her favorite. I don't know if it was because he was younger or because he was a boy or what, but with me, she was always condescending and critical. Everything I did was wrong. My grades weren't good enough even though I got straight A's. My clothes were inappropriate, even though I dressed exactly like all the girls at my school. My friends were bad influences even though they were normal girls who got good grades. My dad never defended me, not once. In fact, the more Helen criticized me, the more he seemed to agree with her. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. But when you're a teenager and you just lost your mom, you basically accept whatever crumbs of attention you get. When I turned 18 and started applying to universities, that's when things got really ugly. I wanted to study hospitality management at the University of Illinois, which isn't cheap, but it's not the most expensive thing in the world either. I asked my dad to help me with tuition, not to pay for everything, just to help because I already had 2 part-time jobs and had saved like $8,000. You know what he told me? That if I wanted to go to college, I'd have to do it on my own. That he and Helen couldn't afford to help me because they had other expenses. Other expenses. My dad is a manager at an insurance company and makes good money, like easily $120,000 a year, and Helen works in human resources making like another $70,000. It wasn't about money. It was about them not wanting to spend it on me. What killed me was that 3 years later, when Matthew was applying to universities, suddenly, there was money. My dad and Helen paid for everything. Absolutely everything. Full tuition at Northwestern, which costs like $60,000 a year, plus rent for an apartment in Evanston, plus a new car. A 2018 Honda Civic. They bought him as a high school graduation gift. I graduated from college with $45,000 in student debt working full-time while studying, and Matthew got everything handed to him on a silver platter. When I asked my dad why, he literally told me that Matthew had more academic potential than me and was a better investment. An investment. That's what he called me. A bad investment. Things kept getting worse little by little. Helen basically erased all evidence that my mom had existed. The photos that were in the house disappeared. My mom's jewelry that was supposed to be mine according to her, well suddenly Helen was wearing. And when I complained, my dad told me I was being dramatic, and that Helen had the right to use things that were in her house. Her house. The house where I had grown up was suddenly her house. I tried to take some of my mom's things when I moved for college, just little things like her recipe book and some earrings she loved. But Helen accused me of stealing, and my dad made me return everything except a necklace I managed to hide in my bag. The last straw came when I was like 24. I had already graduated and was working for a catering company in Chicago, starting from the bottom but learning the business. One day, my brother Matthew called me, which was rare because we almost never talked, and told me that Dad and Helen had sold the house where we grew up. They hadn't told me anything, didn't even ask me if I wanted anything from there before selling it. Turns out they threw away or donated everything, including all of my mom's remaining things. Her books, her clothes, photos, everything. When I called my dad screaming, he told me they didn't need such a big house now that we were adults, and that they had no obligation to consult me about anything. Helen got on the phone and told me I should be grateful. They let me live there for free for 18 years. and to stop being so selfish. Selfish for wanting them to let me. I know they were going to destroy the last place I had memories of my mom. That was the last time I talked to them. I blocked their numbers, deleted them from all my social media, and basically stopped existing for them. Matthew tried calling me a couple times at first, but eventually, he stopped trying too. I didn't go to his graduation from Northwestern, didn't go to the party when he got his first job at a consulting firm, basically went 6 years without having any contact with any of them. And honestly, they were the best 6 years of my life. Without Helen's constant criticism, without my dad's indifference, without having to watch them pamper Matthew while treating me like a second-class citizen, I could focus on myself. During those 6 years, I started my own catering company. I started small, doing events for friends and acquaintances, but I have a good eye for business and I'm obsessive about quality, so the thing grew. After 3 years, I already had 10 employees. After 5 years, we were like 30 people and we were doing weddings with 500 guests, important corporate events, that kind of thing. Last year, we billed $2.3 million and I was in the process of acquiring 2 smaller catering companies to expand the business. One of those acquisitions closed in March of this year. And that's where the story gets interesting. In April, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Matthew was getting married in June to a girl I guess he met at work. The wedding was going to be in Lake Forest at a super fancy venue that charges like a minimum of $80,000 just for renting the place. The invitation had my name handwritten in elegant calligraphy, and inside, there was a note from Matthew saying he really wanted me to be there, that he missed me, that he understood if I didn't want to go, but that it would mean a lot to him to have me on his special day. And there was no apology for the 6 years of silence, no acknowledgement of everything that had happened, just, please come to my wedding. The truth is, my first instinct was to throw the invitation in the trash. Why would I want to go celebrate Matthew after everything? But a part of me, probably the stupid part that still remembered when we were kids and played together before Mom died, thought maybe this was an olive branch. Maybe Matthew had matured and realized how they had treated me. Maybe his girlfriend was a good person and had made him reflect. So, like an idiot, I decided to go. I didn't respond to the RSVP right away. I waited until the last possible day to confirm. Because I wanted to make it clear I wasn't desperate to reconcile. But in the end, I marked that, yes, I would attend. The wedding was on a Saturday at the end of June. I bought myself a nice but not spectacular dress, navy blue because I didn't want to attract too much attention, and drove alone to Lake Forest. The venue was ridiculously ostentatious, all white marble and perfectly manicured gardens and huge fountains. Basically the kind of place where people who want everyone to know they have money get married. When I arrived at the ceremony, I realized I was seated all the way in the back. Literally, in the last row. The bride's family was up front. Then there were Helen and my dad in the first row on the groom's side, but I was seated in the back with people who seemed to be co-workers or distant acquaintances. Matthew didn't even see me when he walked in, or if he saw me, he didn't give any sign of recognizing me. The ceremony was nice, I guess. The bride seemed genuinely in love and Matthew looked happy, which was good because, honestly, part of me was hoping the wedding would be a disaster just out of pettiness. During the reception, things were weird. I was seated at a table with people I didn't know. No one from my family came to greet me, and basically I spent the first hour eating canapés and drinking champagne, trying to convince myself it hadn't been a mistake to come. Then came dinner time. Here's where I need to explain something important. The catering company I had acquired in March was called Prestige Events, and I hadn't changed the name yet because they had established clients and a good reputation. Basically, we had kept both brands operating separately, while I integrated the systems and teams. Guess what catering company Matthew had hired for his wedding? Exactly. Prestige Events. My company. I didn't even know Matthew's wedding contract existed, because Prestige had signed the contract in December, 3 months before I bought it. And I don't personally review every individual contract because I have managers for that. I realized when I saw one of my managers, Roberto, directing the team of waiters. Roberto recognized me immediately, obviously, because he works directly for me, and he looked confused to see me there as a guest. I gave him a discreet signal that we should talk outside, and he confirmed that yes, this was a wedding contracted by Prestige Events under my company, and that the contract was for $45,000, including food, drinks, cake, all the service. Basically, I told him to act normal and that we'd talk about it later, because I didn't want to make a scene yet without knowing exactly what was going on. I went back to my table just as they were serving the first courses. The food was excellent because my company does good work. I'm not going to lie. But then my dad got up to give a toast. He was clearly drunk, like you could see it in how he swayed a little when he stood up, and he started with the typical emotional speech about how Matthew had always been his pride, his joy, the perfect son any father would dream of having. He talked about how he had supported him every step of his life, how he had sacrificed so much to give him the best education, how proud he was of the man he had become. He didn't mention me once. He literally talked as if he only had one son. But the worst came after. Helen got up to give her own toast and started sweet, talking about the bride and what a beautiful couple they made and all that. Then, and I swear this happened, she looked directly at where I was sitting and said, "It's so wonderful to see Matthew surrounded by people who genuinely love and support him. Not like some selfish people who disappear from family life because they don't get what they want. Some people never learn the value of family and prefer to hold childish grudges instead of being mature adults." The whole table went silent. People started turning to see who she was referring to, and of course, I was sitting there feeling my face turn red with embarrassment and rage. Matthew said nothing. He just sat there with an uncomfortable smile while his wife touched his arm like, "Are you going to defend her?" But he just shrugged and let Helen continue. Helen kept saying that family is the most important thing and that she had done everything possible to be a good mother to her husband's children, even when one of them had been ungrateful and resentful. Ungrateful. After years of mistreatment, obvious favoritism, erasing my mom's memory, I was the ungrateful one. Something broke in me at that moment. I had spent 6 years rebuilding myself, creating a successful life on my own, healing from the trauma of growing up feeling like the family left over, and these assholes invited me just to publicly humiliate me at a wedding where, by pure coincidence of the universe, my own company was providing the catering service. The irony was almost comical. Almost. I got up from the table, walked directly to where Roberto was supervising the service of the tables, and told him in a low but firm voice that I needed to talk to the whole team immediately in the kitchen. Roberto looked confused but obeyed. When we got to the kitchen, there were like 25 people between chefs, waiters, bartenders, coordinators, all working to make this wedding perfect. I told them to stop everything immediately. To pack up all the equipment, all the food, all the drinks, absolutely everything, and that we were leaving. Right now. Obviously, there was confusion. Roberto asked me if I was sure that there were like 300 guests still waiting for the main course and the cake, that we could get into legal trouble. I told him yes, I was sure, that I was the owner of the company and that I assumed all responsibility, but that I wasn't going to allow my company to serve people who had just publicly humiliated me. I gave them 30 minutes to pack everything up and leave the venue. Some of the team looked uncomfortable, but no one directly questioned my authority, and in 20 minutes they were already packing boxes with food, dismantling the bar stations, loading everything into the vans. Meanwhile, I went back to the reception hall. Dinner was still in progress. Some guests had already finished their appetizers and were waiting for the next course. I walked up to the head table where Matthew and his wife were, Helen, and my dad, and some important members of the bride's family. I stood there and said, voice clear and loud so they could hear me, "Matthew, congratulations on your wedding." "Helen, Dad, thank you for the beautiful speech reminding me why I left this family 6 years ago. I just wanted you to know that the catering company you hired, Prestige Events, I bought it in March. It's my company, and I just ordered them to pack everything up and leave. Enjoy the rest of your reception without food, without drinks, and definitely without cake." The silence that followed was absolute. Like, you could hear a pin drop. Matthew turned pale. Helen's mouth dropped open. My dad turned red with fury. Matthew's wife looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, something between shock and maybe a bit of admiration. Some guests started murmuring. Others seemed confused, not understanding what was happening. Helen started screaming, "How dare I?" That I was vindictive, that they were going to sue me. The whole repertoire. I told her they could sue all they wanted, that I had very good lawyers and that I would be delighted to explain to a judge exactly why I had made this decision, including her lovely speech from 10 minutes ago. Then I turned around and walked out of the hall with all the dignity I could muster, which honestly wasn't much because my hands were shaking and I felt like I was going to cry or vomit or both. When I got to the parking lot, the team was almost ready. loading the last boxes into the vans. I told Roberto extra bonus for everyone for the inconvenience, and that if anyone from the wedding tried to stop them to call me immediately. I drove back to Chicago in a kind of zombie state, still processing what I had just done. Part of me was horrified. Like, did I really just sabotage my brother's wedding? But another part, the bigger part if I'm honest, was satisfied in an almost violent way. They had spent years making me feel small and insignificant, and I had just demonstrated that I had power, that they couldn't treat me like trash without consequences. On Monday morning, I received an email from a lawyer representing Matthew, Helen, and my dad. They threatened to sue me for $200,000 for damages, including the cost of the catering that wasn't served, damage to reputation, emotional distress, the whole legal package. My own lawyer reviewed the case and basically said that yes, technically I had broken the contract by not completing the service, but that the mitigating circumstances and the fact that I was the owner of the company and had been publicly provoked gave us some margin to negotiate. Besides, the contract had a clause that stipulated that any dispute should be resolved through arbitration before going to court, so they couldn't just sue me directly. The negotiations lasted like 3 months. Eventually, we reached an agreement where I would refund $22,500, exactly half the cost of the contract, plus 10,000 inches additional compensation. In exchange, they signed an NDA that prohibited them from talking publicly about what happened and released my company and me from any future claims. Total, I paid $32,500 for the best moment of my life. Which honestly, considering everything is cheap, my company bills that in a busy weekend. But the thing didn't end there. Like 2 weeks after we signed the agreement, I started receiving strange calls from clients asking if it was true that I was unstable and that I sabotaged events for personal reasons. Turns out Helen had been calling every contact she could find from my company, including current and potential clients, trying to ruin my reputation. She told whoever would listen her version of the story, where I was a spoiled and vindictive daughter who had ruined my brother's perfect wedding out of jealousy. She didn't even mention the context, obviously, just painted me as a business psychopath. Fortunately for me, I have a very competent PR team and clients who know me well. We prepared a very vague official statement saying there had been a personal situation with a client that involved members of my family, that the situation had been resolved legally in a satisfactory manner for all parties, and that my company remained committed to the highest standards of service. We didn't go into details because of the NDA, but we basically made it clear that there was more to the story than what Helen was telling. Besides, several clients came out publicly to defend the quality of my work and the professionalism of my company, so Helen's smear campaign didn't have much real effect. What did happen is that Matthew's marriage started to falter. His wife, it turns out, didn't know anything about the complete history of the family dynamics. Matthew had told her we were estranged but had painted it as something mutual, like we drifted apart after college because of our busy lives. When she saw what Helen and my dad did at the wedding, and then learned the whole story of years of favoritism and mistreatment, she got really angry with Matthew for never defending me, for allowing them to treat me like that for years, and for basically being a passive accomplice to their behavior. Matthew called me like 5 months after the wedding. I didn't answer the first 3 calls, but eventually curiosity won and I answered. He sounded destroyed. He told me he was sorry, that he had been a coward for years, that he knew Helen and Dad treated me badly, but that it had been easier to stay quiet than confront them. He told me his wife had given him an ultimatum, that either he sided with me and established boundaries with Helen and Dad, or she was leaving. He told me that Helen had confessed to him, after years, that she had convinced Dad not to help me financially through college specifically because she wanted me to depend economically on them and have to behave, and when I managed to do it on my own anyway, she decided it was easier to just favor Matthew to punish me for my independence. I don't know what to tell you. It was heavy to hear that. Like, I had always suspected Helen had ill will toward me, but hearing that it had been a conscious and manipulated plan for years to control and punish me was another level. Matthew also told me that Helen had used my dad's money to control many important decisions, like where they would live after getting married, what car they would buy. She had even suggested names for their future children. His wife was fed up with the interference and had insisted they go to couples therapy to process everything. I asked him why he was telling me all this. He told me because he realized he had been an asshole, that he had allowed them to hurt me because it was more comfortable for him, and that he understood if I never forgave him but wanted me to know he was genuinely sorry. He also told me that he and his wife were in the process of buying a new condo and had decided to do it without any financial help from Dad and Helen, specifically to cut the influence they had over their lives. They were going to tell Helen she couldn't have a key to their new house and that unannounced visits would not be tolerated. Honestly, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to tell him to fuck off and hang up, because 6 years of silence and allowing abuse don't get erased with an apology call. But another part, the part that remembered when we were kids and played in the yard before everything became toxic, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could have some kind of relationship eventually. I didn't tell him I forgave him because I still don't know if I do, but I told him I appreciated the call and the honesty. I told him I needed time and space, but that maybe in the future we could have coffee or something. Like 3 weeks later, Matthew texted me saying that he and his wife were planning to do a small vow renewal ceremony, something intimate just with close friends and her family, specifically excluding Helen and Dad. He asked me if I would consider going, that he would completely understand if I didn't want to, but that it would mean a lot to his wife and him. I told him I'd think about it, because honestly, I'm still not sure I want to get involved with that part of my life again. Even the improved version of Matthew. The ironic thing about all of this is that my business didn't suffer at all from all the drama. In fact, it improved. Turns out some people, especially clients who have also had complicated family situations, contacted me specifically because they respected that I had set firm boundaries and defended my dignity. I had a client who hired me for her 25th anniversary specifically because, and I quote, "I need someone with backbone on my team." So, that chaotic weekend where I abandoned a wedding with 300 guests ended up being good publicity in certain circles. Helen and my dad, on the other hand, are facing social consequences in their country club circle. Turns out several of their friends were at the wedding and witnessed Helen's speech and the dramatic exit of the catering, and word spread. Some people think I was excessive, of course, but quite a few realized there was more to the story and started seeing Helen and Dad with different eyes. A friend of the bride's family contacted me afterward to apologize for not saying something at the moment and to tell me she had cut off her relationship with Helen after the wedding because her behavior had been absolutely appalling. Like a month ago, Matthew and I met for coffee. It was weird and awkward at first because we hadn't talked in person in over 6 years, but eventually, the conversation flowed. He told me his wife had helped him see how much Helen and Dad had manipulated him, that he had been in individual therapy in addition to couples therapy, and that he was trying to process years of toxic family dynamics. He asked me about my life, my company, how I really was, and seemed genuinely interested in the answers instead of just going through the motions. I told him about some big contracts I had gotten, about my plans to expand to international events, things like that. He asked me if I ever thought about Mom. I told him yes, all the time, especially when Helen had thrown away all her things. Matthew told me he had secretly kept a photo of Mom all these years, one that Helen thought she had destroyed, and asked me if I wanted it. I started crying there in the cafe like an idiot. The photo was of Mom with me and Matthew when we were really little, like 5 and 2 years old, I think, at the beach. Mom is holding both of us and is smiling at the camera, and we're laughing at something. I didn't remember that photo existed. Matthew told me he had carried it hidden in his wallet since he moved for college, because he didn't want to forget what Mom was like before Helen tried to erase her from family history. That broke me a little, seeing that even though Matthew had been complicit in many things, he had also been trying to preserve something of our real family in secret. I don't know what's going to happen with Matthew and me long term. We're not super close now, nor probably ever will be, but there's something there. A possibility of something. His wife seems nice to me. She was the one who really pushed Matthew to confront all the toxicity, and I appreciate that. I sent them a flower arrangement when I found out they had closed on their new condo. Nothing extravagant, but a gesture. Matthew sent me a photo of the flowers in their new living room with a message saying thanks, and that next week they were going to have a small housewarming dinner if I wanted to go. I still don't know if I'm going to go. Helen and Dad tried to contact me once after Matthew and I started reconnecting. Dad sent me a long email trying to justify everything, saying he had been an imperfect father but that he had done the best he could, that Helen had been a good influence in his life, basically zero accountability and all excuses. Helen sent me a message on LinkedIn, of all platforms, saying she hoped we could be mature adults and get past our differences for the good of the family. I responded to both with a short message saying I appreciated them reaching out, but that I wasn't interested in having a relationship with them at this time, or probably ever. I blocked Dad's email and ignored Helen on LinkedIn. Last week, a client hired me to do the catering for her daughter's wedding in August, budget of $85,000, one of our biggest contracts of the year. During the consultation, she told me she had been at Matthew's wedding as a guest of the bride's family, that she had seen everything that happened, and that although at the moment it seemed dramatic to her, afterward, when she heard more context and saw my work at other events, she decided she wanted someone with my level of professionalism and conviction. She told me verbatim, "I need someone who won't let themselves be walked over and who defends their work with that passion." So, I guess abandoning 300 guests at a wedding reception was the best marketing move of my career. Accidentally. I look back at these last few months and I'm still not completely sure how I feel about everything. Did I do the right thing? I don't know. Was it excessive? Probably. Do I regret it? Sometimes, like at 3 inches the morning when I can't sleep and my brain decides to replay the whole scene on loop. But most of the time, honestly, no. I spent too many years letting them make me feel small, letting them treat me like I didn't matter. And that day at the wedding, I decided enough was enough. I took control of the only thing I could control at that moment, which was my company and my dignity. And I used them. My business is better than ever. I have employees who respect me and clients who value my work. Matthew is trying to improve and build a life, independent of Helen and Dad. And me? Well, I have a photo of my mom that I thought I had lost forever. And that alone is worth all the drama. I don't know what comes next. If Matthew and I will eventually have a real sibling relationship or if this is the most we can achieve after everything that happened. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control of my own narrative, instead of being a secondary character in Helen's dysfunction show. And that, I guess, has to count for something.